places. If it were legalized, that would take a great deal of the financial support that the cartels enjoy away. And that's why I would be in favor of legalization here in the United States.
So all the independent estimates put it at about 7% of the cartel trade. It certainly is a piece of what they do, but it's a relatively small piece of what they do. Depending on who you get your information from. So this one's coming from the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Task Force. So it's all of the Rocky Mountain region. They have a task force for high-level drug trafficking. So these are the guys fighting the cartel coming into the Rocky Mountain region. And one of their primary concerns in it, with the extremely lax limits on what a person can grow, is that these organizations we're inviting into Colorado, because why grow your weed in Mexico and then have to cross the border when you could grow it right here very legally and then just export it? Your point about the cartels being a horrible organization that needs to be shut down is very valid, but again, we're looking at about 7% of it. We've got to go after the cocaine, the other opiates, and human trafficking is really large for them also.
Why do you believe we would be exporting it?
Because there's not a limit on what a person can grow. We can possess up to 6 plants, but a co-op can be formed very, very easily. So it would be simple for anybody to set up a corporation, have 25 names on it, everybody have their 6 legal plants, grow those, and then export them. That's one of the primary concerns in law enforcement. And we've got tremendous support on our side from law enforcement inside of Colorado because of that concern. Roll it, Josh.
Yeah, and real quickly, what you described saying these co-ops, they'd be illegal under Amendment 64. You can't sell it, you can't ship it out of state. Like, all of those things are illegal. Like your 7% number of drug trades, like of marijuana proceeds that go to the drug cartels in Mexico, that's a newer number. The Office of National Drug Policy Control pegged it at about 60% about 5 or 6 years ago. And now they've walked that back because people who wanted to change our laws have been using that number, and so they've changed their tune. And what's so fascinating is Vicente Fox, the former president of Mexico, looking at this issue, says the United States has to change their laws. Our demand for drugs is not going away. And because of that, it's led to many deaths in Mexico. And since 2006, there's been 50,000 deaths in Mexico related to the drug war. 50,000. And and real quickly too, the rehab number of young people in rehab, like that's another good number. But what it also fails to say is that a lot of those young people are forced into rehab by the courts, which is actually the largest contributor of people going to rehab for marijuana is court-sanctioned sentences. And so it's actually slightly disingenuous to say that, like, to imply that it's a problem, because it's actually not a problem. Marijuana is far safer than alcohol is. Like, with prohibition of alcohol, we saw crimes, we funded drug cartels. That's what we're doing right now with marijuana prohibition. There's 100,000 medical marijuana patients here in Colorado. It's estimated that 500,000 people in Colorado would admit to a government survey that they used marijuana last month. That's a lot of people that we're criminalizing. That's a lot of people that are buying their marijuana from someone on the streets who's not paying taxes on it, who's not helping our society.
So it seems like most people in the room agree that imprisoning people for getting high is kind of a waste of money.
Yes.
Explain the tax part of this, because I worry whenever anything says there's taxes on something and it has to go to something else, you create a government constituency for increasing use or whatever. Like 10 years from now, when we're rolling in schools and what we really need is, I don't know, cops or teachers, is this thing still going to be forcing us to build more schools because all this money's coming in and it mandates that?
If we amend the Constitution again, then no, it won't. But the excise tax right now is not required. There's no excise tax tacked to this at all. What there is the requirement that the legislator vote on an excise tax. And you can probably educate us a little bit more on that, but I think there's some issues with Tabor around this. You cannot require the legislator to vote on a tax. So if the legislator chooses to enact an up to 15% excise tax, and then if that money ends up going to public school construction, then yeah, I mean, great point. 4 years from now, we want to change it. Again, the issue is the vehicle on this. Then we have to amend the Constitution yet again.
And just real quickly, he's correct. Like how it works is it requires the legislature to propose a tax to the people, and so the people of Colorado actually have to vote on the excise tax. Frankly, I think the people of Colorado are going to support taxing marijuana, and I think the legislature hopefully will support taxing marijuana as well. You know, the tax only applies to the wholesale to the retail transaction. So just one part of the it's one part of the transaction of where the excise tax will be. The general sales tax would just go to the general fund of various communities, of various schools. You know, like I said, you know, the medical marijuana industry in Colorado, you know, they estimate since about 2010 they brought in about $10 million of local and state sales tax. You know, a lot of it, you know, down in Colorado Springs, you know, that $50,000 a month they brought is actually what allowed them to turn their streetlights back on and allowed them to open their parks up again. And so, you know, a lot of it's the sales tax as well. You know, the excise tax is earmarked for schools, and the legislature doesn't have to pass it, and the people of Colorado don't have to pass it. But the sales tax is there, and frankly, there's nothing that can be done to take that away.
Hopefully some of that goes to the regulating agencies, because right now that's a big giant question. Who's going to regulate this thing? Where is that money going to come from? Regulate marijuana like alcohol is a fantastic idea. We have a couple of big agencies that do that, and if we were to get the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and marijuana in place first, this could make a little bit more sense. It's kind of cart before the horse stuff, though, because as Josh has pointed out, it goes into the general fund. And how do we take that money then to build an agency that is going to regulate, unless we're kind of playing catch-up after we do it?
You know, and that's absolutely a great point. So how it works is that, you know, there's licensing and application fees. This is how it works in liquor. This is how it works in gaming. This is how it works in medical marijuana. And it's those licensing and application fees that actually fund the regulatory agency. And in this case, the regulatory agency is the Department of Revenue, and they have wide leeway to make all sorts of rules. All the regulations, you know, that relate to this will actually be made by the Department of Revenue, probably with some help from the legislature, you know, and they'll be able to craft it to best fit the needs of the community. In Colorado, with the medical marijuana, their licensing and application fees brought in $9 million, you know, the first year, and they used that $9 million to regulate it. It took them a little while to catch up, you know, because they didn't actually, you know, it took them a little while to figure out how to regulate it, but they're definitely on board now. And that $9 million actually, you know, at one point they had more regulators than the Colorado Bureau of Investigation had employees. You know, so it's definitely possible to regulate this. The system's built to be self-funding, so these businesses will be paying licensing fees to be regulated, and the sales tax will really just be a bonus for the government and for our communities.
Well, yeah, it was interesting because when you guys were talking, in my mind, you were each making each other's point. Like I think it'd be wonderful if we could take a whole industry that does not show up on the chart and call it agriculture. That would be a wonderful thing. And so, you know, that's kind of weird. And you were talking about, you know, that maybe this shouldn't be done through the Constitution, and I would agree to that. But you know, the state legislature has not been responsive to the will of the people, so we didn't have a choice. You know.
Yeah, you're right. There was, especially with the marijuana issue, there's a marijuana ballot measure in Springfield, Missouri, and the people collected all these signatures. This just happened within the last month. They collected all these signatures, they put it on the ballot, and then what the city council in Springfield is they decided not to have an election, they passed the measure, and then that actually allowed them to repeal the measure. So they passed the measure, repealed the measure within a 2-week period, just overriding the will of the people. And so, frankly, we had no choice but to go to the Constitution.
Well, bottom line is, it's not going to be cheaper.
It's going to be considerably cheaper.
Well, you got it.
Yeah, and I think everybody agrees on that. And again, it's fun to be with a good-natured crowd here. But I'll tell you guys that again, something maybe another thing we'd even agree on is that of the 3 major contributing factors to youth use, and we know that youth use is bad. We will wholeheartedly agree on this. Cost is huge. It's the perception, the fear of getting caught, the availability of it, and the cost of it. So if you remove the stigma that currently surrounds, the perception of harm goes down, and for youth the harm is real and is significant. If we flood the market, I mean, we all know what happens when you flood the market. The cost is going to go down and the accessibility is going to go way up. That one we won't agree on. But all of the major contributors are there to see increased youth use, and that's the crux of this thing. Marijuana right now, 10,500 arrests is tickets up to 2 ounces of marijuana, which is a lot of weed. Up to 2 ounces of marijuana is a ticketable offense in Colorado. It's a $100 fine. So people are being hauled off to jail for this. I mean, those of you who want, I've been sober for 16 years, but I certainly did my fair share of everything else that there was to do out there. And I'm not a throw in the stone kind of a person. Those of you who are adults and who want to do this, fantastic. Do this in the privacy of your own home. Don't drive, and please don't let my kids see it. That's the issue. I'm concerned with how this is going to muck up some of those other things.
Yeah, no, I agree. Adults should be allowed to do it in the privacy of their own home. You shouldn't drive, and you shouldn't let kids see it. And and that is one thing about our measure. Like, it is in the Constitution, but it provides local governments enormous control to they can ban advertising if they want to. So it's in the Constitution to allow these governments to restrict and ban advertising, allow them to limit the number of them, the size of them, the location of them, and allow them to ban them altogether. And so if it's not working for a community, the local government has options to make it work. And
I have a question.
Sorry, could you?
I'm going to agree with Ben, I think, because I'm a little doubt about, because of the constitutionality, that you want to put that onto the Constitution, our Colorado Constitution. I think I agree with Ben that it's going to cause problems for us in the future. We seem to add, in Colorado, everything onto the Constitution. And I think we make a mistake in doing that. I think we need to let the federal government decide to do that. I agree that we need medical marijuana. I have relatives and friends that are on medical marijuana, and I know their background, why they need that medical marijuana. But it's regulated. I've had one friend, the police came to his house just to check him out with all his 5 kids. They said, okay, you're fine. But I think I'm going to go just because of the constitutionality, because of you putting it on the Constitution of Colorado. I think it's a burden for all of us.
Are there any other questions for these gentlemen?
Just I'm a little confused with all of this in that it's still federally illegal.
Yes, sir.
And so, how do you think the federal government's not going to come after people?
No, it's a very
And
good
especially if Romney becomes...
Yeah.
Well, actually, Obama shut down quite a few more dispensaries than Bush ever did, so there's not a big friend in the White House. Yeah, I mean, you get a Mormon. What's he going to do about it? Or if we re-elect President Obama, he's been very harsh on it. And Washington most likely will legalize. I think that this is probably going to happen. So the test case will take place soon, but the federal government has to get involved in this, and they will get involved in this because they can't. If you guys remember the Supreme Court decision that overturned that nonsense law in Arizona, the majority decision said that state law cannot supersede federal law. So we're going to have a showdown. And again, another thing here, and then you make the last point, Joshua.
Yeah.
But another thing here is there's going to be a lightning rod state where we test this out and we see how much the federal government is going to get involved. They're going to get involved. I think we'll probably see some more of that as the election gets even closer. They can't keep ignoring it. I would prefer that not to be Colorado, to have the feds here trying to make a point again and again. And I'll shut up, man.
It's a very good question about the federal government, and I definitely, understand that, you'd like federal law to change first, and I would too. Our federal government has been fighting this war on drugs. Some say 80 years, actually 75 years just this week was when the federal marijuana prohibition started. The first person to be federally charged was a Colorado citizen. And what we've got from this war on drugs? In 1980 we had about 50,000 people in jail for drug offenses. 1997 we had, there was a couple 100,000. The addiction rates, 1914, 1.3% of our population is addicted to drugs. Today, 1.3% of our population is addicted to drugs. We spend $41 billion a year enforcing drug prohibition. And And for what? What do we have for? We have the highest prison rate in the world. And none of this makes sense. You know, so we're trying to arrest our way out of this civil rights problem, and it's just not right. And you know, with marijuana offenses particularly, and the federal government actually makes less than 1% of all marijuana arrests in the whole country. In 2007, they arrested 7,000 people for marijuana offenses. The state of Colorado arrests 10,000 to 15,000 people each year, and that's over the whole country. And so, you know, what this does, you know, is it says, look, as a state, we don't have to enforce federal marijuana prohibition anymore. We don't have to spend our tax dollars doing it. We don't have to tie up our police doing it. If the federal government wants to come in and do it, they can do it. And that's what happened with alcohol prohibition. Is the state of New York, the state of Colorado, who said alcohol prohibition doesn't make sense. The use has gone up. We're enriching criminals. We're no longer enforcing this. And they stopped. And they said, there's nothing you can do, federal government, to make us enforce one of your laws. And that's absolutely true. And so, you know, that's the case here. Is we have the opportunity, you know, as the people of Colorado to say, look, this war on drugs has failed, this war on marijuana has failed, and we're not going to spend our time, our money, our resources enforcing it. And I think that's the only way we'll ever get federal change, you know, just like it happened with alcohol.